What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. Okay, so now we're looking at Numbers 14. Last chapter, they sent some scouts to get a look at the Promised Land, see what it was like, what the land was like, and what the people in the cities were like. Basically, to try and see whether or not it was worth it. And most of the scouts said, no, not worth it. The land's good, but the people there are just absolute giants. We don't stand a chance against them. Now, one scout, Caleb, spoke to the contrary, because his thought process was basically, hey, the land's good. God's got this. Assuming he wants it to happen, he promised this land to us. We should be fine. Let's go for it. But all the other scouts are like, no. We're not doing it. And they are doing their best to convince the rest of the Israelites not to go. So, then we get to hear in Numbers chapter 14. Then the whole community began weeping aloud, and they cried all night. Their voices rose in a great chorus of protest against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in Egypt, or even here in the wilderness, they complained. Why is the Lord taking us to this country only to have us die in battle? Our wives and our little ones will be carried off as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? Then they plotted among themselves, let's choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. So, because of the negative report, especially regarding, the people of the land and how big and strong that they are, more complaining ensues. They had already complained in the wilderness about the food that they had and how they were getting bored with it, basically. But now their complaint is, oh, great. God's just going to send us into battle against these monstrous enemies, and we're going to die in battle. Which then means, those who would not be fighting, our wives and children, are going to get taken by the people we're trying to conquer. Which is almost even worse than them just being stranded out here in the wilderness and dying that way. So then we get to verse 5. Then Moses and Aaron fell face down on the ground before the whole community of Israel. Two of the men who had explored the land, Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh, tore their clothing. They said to all the people of Israel, the land we traveled through and explored is a wonderful land. And if the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us safely into that land and give it to us. It is a rich land flowing with milk and honey. Do not rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people of the land. They are only helpless prey to us. They have no protection, but the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. So, yeah, Caleb is doubling down on his assessment, his gung-ho nature and wanting to go into the Promised Land and take it. And Joshua is with him in that view. Which, Joshua, of course, being kind of an assistant to Moses for a while, it would make sense that he's the other person who kind of, takes this stance, because he would be closer with God, and especially with Moses, than a lot of the other Israelites. So he probably having a bit of a higher view of God, if we're being honest about this, he probably agrees with the opinion that, yes, if God's on their side, they can do it. Doesn't matter how big and strong the enemies are. They don't have God on their side. We do. We got this. Or, more accurately, God's got this. Moving on to verse 10. But the whole community began to talk about stoning Joshua and Caleb. Then the glorious presence of the Lord appeared to all the Israelites at the tabernacle. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? Will they never believe me, even after all the miraculous signs I have done among them? I will disown them and destroy them with a plague. Then I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they are." You being Moses, because he's the one that God said this to. Footnote of tabernacle just says the tent of meeting. Again, closer translation of the original Hebrew. But yeah, it's kind of weird how all throughout this process of them leaving Egypt, or shoot, even the plagues in Egypt, and then leaving, and then being at Mount Sinai, getting the commandments, and then traveling through the wilderness, and then now as they're at the edge of the promised land, they have constantly questioned and doubted God. But this might be a good time to bring up the fact / remind ourselves of the fact that the namesake of the people is Israel. The name that Jacob was given because he wrestled with God. That's roughly the translation of the name Israel, is wrestling with God. So, I'm not saying that justifies this by any means, but it should kind of to us readers be expected, given that name. I mean, we all have times when we doubt God in our own lives. We struggle with God in those kinds of ways too. Maybe not to this extent, and most of us, I would assume, are not faced with these kinds of situations, but still, the Israelites, the Israelites as a people group really in a way kind of represent us, just humanity as a whole. We're flawed. We mess up. We doubt. But God's there with us anyway. Sure, God might want to, start things over, or at least communicate that he wants to start things over. But, I mean, rightfully so. We give God plenty of reason to want to do so. But, ultimately, in the end, that's not usually what happens. In fact, I feel pretty confident in saying that that's not at all what happens with, God involved. But I digress. Okay. Just thought it was something relevant to note in amongst this situation. Because we often look at this and say, okay, really? What is wrong with these people? How can they keep doubting God so much after all these miracles and signs? But again, these people, by their very name and nature, are going to wrestle with God. Anyway, okay. Verse 13. But Moses objected. "What will the Egyptians think when they hear about it?" he asked the Lord. "They know full well the power you displayed in rescuing your people from Egypt. Now if you destroy them, the Egyptians will send a report to the inhabitants of this land, who have already heard that you live among your people. They know, Lord, that you have appeared to your people face to face, and that your pillar of cloud hovers over them. They know that you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day, and the pillar of fire by night. Now if you slaughter all these people with a single blow, the nations that have heard of your fame will say, 'The Lord was not able to bring them into the land he swore to give them, so he killed them in the wilderness.'" So, again, I don't know if I really want to call it negotiating, but the pleading that Moses does on behalf of the people is once again kind of centered around, God's promises, but also just generally how the situation would make God look, which essentially is not good. Because then it's like, okay, you showed your might by saving your people from Egypt. But then, if you can't get them into the promised land, that's gonna look real bad on you. It's gonna make it look like you brought them out of Egypt just to kill them off in the wilderness. And who would want to follow a God like that? Who would fear a God like that? I mean, shoot, maybe people would fear such a God, but like the assumption being that he does this to his own people, again, that would make them not want to follow such a God. Anyway, verse 17. "Please, Lord, prove that your power is as great as you have claimed. For you said, 'The Lord is slow to anger and filled with unfailing love, forgiving every kind of sin and rebellion. But he does not excuse the guilty. He lays the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generations. In keeping with your magnificent, unfailing love, please pardon the sins of this people, just as you have forgiven them ever since they left Egypt.'" So, the part about being, slow to anger, forgiving sin and rebellion, that I can't remember exactly where that came up, but I think that did come up previously. I want to say back in like Leviticus or something. Or it might have been in Exodus, kind of along with the Ten Commandments. In any case, God had previously stated, some of his qualities and at least some of the way he enacts judgment. And this would run kind of contradictory to that. Or at least that's what Moses is arguing here. So then, verse 20. "Then the Lord said, 'I will pardon them as you have requested. But as surely as I live, and as surely as the earth is filled with the Lord's glory, not one of these people will ever enter that land. They have all seen my glorious presence and the miraculous signs I performed both in Egypt and in the wilderness. But again and again they have tested me by refusing to listen to my voice. They will never even see the land I swore to give their ancestors. None of those who have treated me with contempt will ever see it. But my servant Caleb has a different attitude than the others have. He has remained loyal to me, so I will bring him into the land he explored. His descendants will possess their full share of that land. Now turn around and don't go on toward the land where the Amalekites and Canaanites live. Tomorrow you must set out for the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea.'" So, God decides to spare them and at least let the people live, but because of how stubborn and rebellious they've been, he's not letting them enter the promised land. I guess the assumption being that, there will be more people born to them later who maybe then will eventually go into the promised land. Or even just that Caleb / a select group of people would be able to go into the promised land at a later date. Because it is still the promised land. It is still the land that God said he would give to his people. And not just in Abraham's generation or the ensuing 2 or 3 generations, but he promised Abraham that the multitude of his descendants would live in that promised land. So it's one of those things where it's got to happen at some point, but maybe it doesn't have to happen right now. So then God tells them to turn around in the direction of the Red Sea, which is where they basically came from. Because remember, they crossed the Red Sea as they were leaving Egypt. Okay, Hebrews says Sea of Reeds. That was probably more so what they called the Red Sea at that time. At least, the Israelites. Okay. And it seems that, God's punishment for not having faith doesn't just end at, oh, yeah, you're not going to go into the promised land. But we're about to get into that here, starting with verse 26. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "How long must I put up with this wicked community and its complaints about me? Yes, I have heard the complaints the Israelites are making against me. Now tell them this, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very things I heard you say. You will all drop dead in this wilderness. Because you complained against me, every one of you who is 20 years old or older and was included in the registration will die. You will not enter and occupy the land I swore to give you. The only exceptions will be Caleb son of Jephunneh and Joshua son of Nun. You said your children would be carried off as plunder. Well, I will bring them safely into the land, and they will enjoy what you have despised. But as for you, you will drop dead in this wilderness, and your children will be like shepherds, wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. In this way, they will pay for your faithlessness until the last of you lies dead in the wilderness." So God's like, yeah, you said you were worried about your children being carried off as plunder. That's not exactly what's going to happen. They're going to go into the promised land, but you're not. These children that you're so worried about are going to be the ones who get to have the privilege that you didn't because of your lack of faith. And all the rest of you are going to drop dead somewhere here in the wilderness. Then verse 34. Because your men explored the land for 40 days, you must wander in the wilderness for 40 years, a year for each day, suffering the consequences of your sins. Then you will discover what it is like to have me for an enemy. I, the Lord, have spoken. I will certainly do these things to every member of the community who has conspired against me. They will be destroyed here in this wilderness, and here they will die. The 10 Moses had sent to explore the land, the ones who incited rebellion against the Lord with their bad report, were struck dead with a plague before the Lord. Of the 12 who had explored the land, only Joshua and Caleb remained alive. So there were not just long-term consequences of, okay, y'all are going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years and die, but it seems like very shortly after this rebellion and this bad report was spread among the people, the 10 scouts who essentially created and spread this bad report were struck with a plague and died from that pretty shortly thereafter. Joshua and Caleb were fine because they didn't think the same thing. They thought it would have been okay to go and, try and settle the promised land. Also, kind of poetic, for lack of a better way to put it, wandering 40 years because they scouted the land for 40 days. Yeah, God's like that. Quite often, actually, you find as you read through the Bible, it's like, all right, well, because you did this, I'm doing this. Or because you didn't do this, here's what's going to happen. It's often the punishment is closely related to the crime, I guess. Not always crime per se, but the offense might be a better word. So, then we get to verse 39. And I think I'll read through the end from here. When Moses reported the Lord's words to all the Israelites, the people were filled with grief. Then they got up early the next morning and went to the top of the range of hills. "Let's go," they said. "We realize that we have sinned, but now we are ready to enter the land the Lord has promised us." But Moses said, "Why are you now disobeying the Lord's orders to return to the wilderness? It won't work. Do not go up into the land now. You will only be crushed by your enemies because the Lord is not with you. When you face the Amalekites and Canaanites in battle, you will be slaughtered. The Lord will abandon you because you have abandoned the Lord." But the people defiantly pushed ahead toward the hill country, even though neither Moses nor the ark of the Lord's covenant left the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in those hills came down and attacked them and chased them back as far as Hormah. So, again, the way the Israelites kind of flip-flop on things, they get their own notions of what's right or wrong and, make a decision based on that. But then they hear from God and they're like, "No, I'm sorry, please, let's do the thing that we were going to do." And in this case, they try and go into the promised land, even though God has now said, "Nope, you're not going to go." And it fails miserably. I would assume a number of them end up dying from this. And those who don't die end up having to run away. So, unsuccessful attempt to enter the promised land there, because God was not with them. Nor was Moses, nor was the Ark of the Covenant a major signifier of God's presence. So, yeah, no, it didn't work. It's almost like they thought if they went with God's original idea that it would just work because, they were sorry, or because they regretted doubting God. But what God says is final, and God said that they were not going to that they were not even going to see the promised land. And yeah, their attempts failed, unsurprisingly, because God meant business when he said what he said. So anyway, I guess that wraps it up for Numbers chapter 14. Not exactly ending on a high note, But such things happen when disobeying God. So, yeah, God is not too pleased with the Israelites' unwillingness to go into the Promised Land, just because they thought the people were too big and tough there or whatever. As if, God hasn't already done greater miracles than that. Anyway, so, yeah, now they're fated to wander the wilderness for another 40 years before any of them can go to the Promised Land. And even at that, most of them won't. So, anyway, that's all we got for this time. As always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description to get info on other social media pages and all that good stuff. And leave comments below there with any thoughts you have. So, I hope you're all doing well. Hopefully, I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.